in the opposition, the right one was Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, we were all appalled by the terror attack in Streatham on Sunday, and I want to join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the bravery and dedication of the police, security services and all the other emergency response staff in the way in which they dealt with what was a terrifying and terrible situation. Last Friday, this country left the European Union. Britain's place in the world is at a crossroads, and whilst there are different views across this country, we will be holding this government to account as the negotiations begin. But my hope is that we now truly come together to shape our common future and build an internationalist, diverse and outward-looking country. Indeed, we'll get an opportunity to do that when Britain hosts the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, later this year. Despite the fact that we are the 11th hour to save the planet, the former Tory minister and now ex-president of COP26, Claire O'Neill, said, and I quote, "There has been a huge lack of leadership and engagement from this government." What on earth did she mean?
Mr. Speaker, I think if you look at what this government is achieving and already has achieved on climate change, it is quite phenomenal. And he will know, Mr. Speaker, that last year was the first year on record that renewables produced more of the energy of this country than fossil fuels. He will know that since this government came to power in 2010, 99% of all the solar panels that have achieved that miracle were installed under this government. We are delivering for the people of this country. We are reducing greenhouse gas. All he would produce, I'm afraid, is a load of hot air.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is the government's own figures show that it's missing the carbon budget, let alone by 2050. It will be 2099 before this country meets net zero. And we discovered this morning that two former Conservative leaders have also turned down the job formerly done by his minister. Maybe it could be third time lucky. Perhaps we could make a joint approach to the member for Chingford and Woodford Green. Perhaps he would like to take on that job. He's over here and in the chamber all ready for it. His own former Tory minister said we should have clear actions, an agreed plan and a roadmap for the year of action. But we do not. So why is the Prime Minister failing so spectacularly to measure up to the scale of the climate crisis that this country and indeed this planet is facing?
Mr. Speaker, this is beyond satire. This is the first country, the first major economy in the world to have set a target of carbon neutral by 2050. It's an absolutely fantastic thing. We are leading the world in our ambitions, and we will have a wonderful summit in Glasgow, one of the most fantastic cities in our country, at the end of the year.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, this country isn't meeting its target, and it isn't due to meet its target, and I think the Prime Minister should recognise that. Even the Paris targets are not enough. The UN says we have just a decade to change course if we want to avert a climate catastrophe. So let's look at something else his ex-minister said. The Prime Minister promised to lead from the front and guaranteed there would be money and people. But these promises are not close to being met. What on earth could she have been talking about?
Mr. Speaker, as so often, I'm not entirely sure what the right honourable gentleman is talking about, because if you look at what this government has actually delivered, if you look at what our Conservative policies of backing green tech, of backing innovation, of supporting a dynamic market economy, which is the solution to these problems, we have cut CO2 emissions in this country since 2010 on 1990 levels by 42%. 42%. That is an astonishing achievement. And at the same time, the economy has grown by 73%, thanks to free market, dynamic, one nation conservatism. That is our approach. What's his?
His former minister said, my advice to... Well, you might not like it, but I'm going to read it. My advice to anyone to whom the Prime Minister is making promises, whether it's voters, world leaders, ministers, employees or family members, is get it in writing, get a lawyer to look at it and make sure the money's in the bank. Not my words, hers. The Prime Minister's failure in government means this country won't meet its net zero target until 2099. This government has banned offshore wind, and his government is funding billions on fossil fuel projects abroad. Is this what his minister means by the absence of leadership?
Mr. Speaker, I think the grotesque failure of the Leader of the Opposition to understand what is happening in this country's economy, let alone in the fight against climate change, is quite mind-boggling. I can inform him today that this country is leading in not just producing the technology to generate offshore wind, but the northeast of this country leads the world in producing and designing those fantastic turbines. And it's because of that technological innovation that we are able massively to expand our renewables. And I can tell him, I think he may know this, that in 1990 this country was 70% dependent on coal power. We are now today, and by the way, he'd want to reopen the coal mines. Today we are down to 3%, Mr. Speaker, and by 2024 it will be 0. That's our plan. What's his?
It was the Labour Party that proposed the climate change emergency motion to this House on May the 1st. And the Prime Minister is quoting things that happened in 1990 and afterwards. During that time, of course, he was a climate sceptic who didn't say anything about this at all. Poor leadership is nothing new to this Prime Minister. When he was Foreign Secretary, he cut the number of climate attachés across the world by 60% in our embassies and reportedly said, "You're not going to spill this out to the media, are you?" to his staff. Considering his monumental failure in advance of COP26, isn't it really just a continuation of his climate change denial statements that he was regularly making up until 2015?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman is talking absolute nonsense. This government is delivering a fantastic agenda in tackling climate change. We lead the world in going for a zero-carbon approach. His own approach is utterly unclear and has indeed been condemned by the GMB as a disaster for the UK economy that would force people to he would confiscate people's cars and prevent them from having foreign holidays. We have a plan that will allow the UK economy to continue to grow, that will create jobs and tackle climate change.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I really do admire the Prime Minister's very vivid imagination. But unfortunately, his vivid imagination seems to have taken over from his memory, because he might recall saying that climate change is a primitive fear without foundation. The Prime Minister of Bangladesh said, "Any consequence of failure to deliver a climate action plan must fall equally on every country. The cost of our inaction is devastating to every living person." But our Prime Minister is failing on the biggest stage on the most important issue of our time. And now his former minister has described preparations in Whitehall as Whitehall not tying infighting and obfuscation, petty political squabbles and black ops briefings. No wonder the Prime Minister is shutting newspapers out of Number 10, because he doesn't like the briefings. When will he face up to the climate emergency and take the action necessary to turn Glasgow into the turning point when this world will stop the levels of pollution and climate change we're having and go forward to a sustainable future, because his government's policies simply don't take us there.
Mr. Speaker, this government is showing world leadership in tackling climate change, and we're going to have a a fantastic summit at Glasgow, and I look forward very much to it. Now, Mr. Speaker, he mentions the media. They did an inquest finally about what happened in the general election, and they discovered in the Labour Party that it wasn't the leadership that was at fault. It wasn't Brexit. It was the media. They blame the media for what happened. Mr. Speaker, I don't blame them. I am a journalist. I love journalism, and I think the people of this country, Mr. Speaker, don't blame the media. They can see the media do their best to represent the reality, and the reality is this is a government that is getting on with delivering 40 new hospitals, 20,000 more police, tackling climate change, £30,000 starting salaries for every teacher in the country. It's not about the presentation of the facts, Mr. Speaker, it's about the reality, and he can't cope with the reality.